Good evening. My name is David Siegel. I am the relatively new executive director of the Ent Center for the Arts here at UCCS. And thank you. Thrilled to be here. And the Visiting Artists and Critics series was founded as a collaborative program between the Visual Arts and Art History program and the Galleries of Contemporary Art, or GOCA, here at UCCS. And I think it represents the very best of what the Ent Center can and should be. The series has brought artists and scholars to campus to present public lectures like this and to meet with students and classes in workshop settings. This is the 10th season of the Visiting Artists and Critics series. And the series includes a lineup of presentations with artists of national and international renown. The goal for the lecture is to foster an understanding and appreciation of contemporary art through dialogue and critical conversation. I'm especially thrilled for tonight's lecture by Chinn Wang because it highlights an especially significant artist from here in Colorado, just up the road at DU. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Daisy Mcgowan, who is the director of the Galleries of Contemporary Art and the mastermind of all things GOCA and this exhibition. Daisy.
Thanks so much, David. It's wonderful to have you here with us and to be introduced. We've been without an executive director, and we were so fortunate to bring David into the Ent Center for the Arts team here, so I'm just thrilled. As David mentioned, I'm the director of the Galleries of Contemporary Art. I've been very fortunate to be in this role now for 11 years, and 10 years ago, yes, we launched the Visiting Artists and Critics Lecture Series, and I'm so proud that we've kept it going all this time. I want to recognize our generous sponsors. This series is supported by the CU President's Fund for the Humanities, the B. Radenberg Foundation, the Colorado Creative Industries, and UCCS Visual and Performing Arts Department, as well as our UCCS Student Government Association. So thank you to our sponsors. You may not know, at GOCA, we fundraise for 100% of our program, and we commit to funding 100% of the artists and creatives that we work with. That is very important to us. So we can say the words that we can't do this without you, and it's very true. So I would love to recognize our PAC donors. If you are a PAC donor, could you raise your hand and we can just give you some quick recognition. I see some in the audience and you're not raising your hand, so I'm just gonna say thank you. It's okay, and we appreciate you so much. So it's really my honor to introduce our featured artist to you, Chinn Wang. This exhibition has been some years in process, as all of our exhibitions are, and of course, I don't have to mention the delays and extensions of dates that have happened. So here we are at last. We even got to delay this event, and so we finally made it, and we even made it through the snow tonight and the weather, so I really thank you all for being here. It's a testament to how important the arts are at UCCS. I know some of you are here with your classes, and there will be a Q&A at the end. Whether you're a lifelong learner or enrolled at UCCS, we'd love to have your questions, and I'll be coming around with a microphone. You can keep your mask on, and I'll be handing out a microphone. So if you have a question at the end, we have about 15 minutes for Q&A, and then I invite you all next door to the gallery, and we made some custom GOCA chocolates, and so first come, first serve. I think there's quite a few out there. We'd love for you to have some GOCA chocolates. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Chinn to you all, and then she's going to share a wonderful talk with us, and we learn more about her practice, and of course, really wonderful layering to experiencing the exhibition next door. So Chinn Wang earned her Master's in Fine Arts degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and before that, a dual BA in Art Practice and Art History from the University of California at Berkeley. She's currently teaching associate professor and foundations coordinator at the School of Art and Art History at the University of Denver, DU, and lives in Boulder, Colorado. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Chinn Wang.
Okay, let me see if I can do this with these earrings. Oh God. Hi everyone. This is the first time that I'm speaking without my mask on, so this is going to be a new experience for me. Thank you so much for being here, especially on this very, very frigidly cold but also extremely auspicious day, 2/22/22. I think it's very lucky that we're all here together and are able to be here together. I want to thank Daisy Mcgowan and Stephanie Von Fange so much for the invitation to have this exhibition and for all the wonderful and thoughtful and generous support that they've shown me during the preparation and installation and now the opening of this exhibition. I'm so grateful from the bottom of my heart. So today's talk, let me see if I can do this. I'm calling Vital Energy, a Source, a Search. This talk will feature older work, current work, and thoughts about where my work is going. Let me see if this is working. Wonderful. Vital energy is a concept and a phrase that I've been interested in for a little while. I was on sabbatical from DU in the fall, where I was exploring some creative research, reading, and field visits based on ideas of vital energy in relationship to geomancy. Geomancy is the practice of close observation and divination of the natural landscape for the selection of auspicious locations for burial, focusing on sites channeling vital energy. So this idea of vital energy has been really interesting to me recently, especially during the past few years during this quite brutal and devastating I've been feeling lack of vital energy. I've been really searching for and sort of refocusing my thoughts on where my vital energy comes from. And through my research, which I'll talk about in a little bit later, and which is the work in the exhibition next door is stemming from a lot of this research about geomancy's interest in the collection of vital energy that comes from underneath the surface of the earth and channels in specific locations, and those locations are these really auspicious and good fortune infused locations where our loved ones might live for all eternity. So I've been thinking about vital energy, and I pulled some kind of definitions that have been really important for my current body of work. So vital energy being, an essential energy that flows mysteriously beneath the surface of the earth. Vital energy being something that gives birth to and supports all living things. And an energy that has sort of a magical power to influence humans in the ways that we behave on earth, in the ways that we exist and perpetuate our sort of identities and our ancestry after death. And the idea that vital energy isn't found everywhere, that it kind of comes up in these locations that are in particular geomantic harmony. So there's particular landscapes and features of our natural earth that kind of channel this vital energy, and that we can search for these spaces to provide good luck and good fortune for not only your loved ones, but for all those that follow. So my interest in this work and this concept really comes from a real struggle recently in how to formulate how we as humans formulate our identities, and how those identities are perpetually malleable, that our identities aren't fixed, that they're constantly in flux, and that's a good thing. That I talk to my students all the time about how this idea that we're going to one day figure it all out, we're going to one day know who we are perfectly, and in this sort of static mode is such a fallacy, right? That we change all the time, and this idea that the amount of vital energy that we have in our lives sort of fluctuates, right? We have times when we are full of it and times where perhaps we're lacking a little bit. But this search for this vital energy is constant and fulfilling in very specific ways. So my work, I think, whereas only recently I've sort of defined what this search has been for me. I've been thinking about this concept, I think, for a very long time in my studio practice and in my creative work. So you'll be seeing older work and newer work that explores all of these ideas. So the first section of my talk, I want to focus on, what are our sources of vital energy? What is my source of vital energy? And for me, one of the very first things that I think of is the land, is nature, and our relationships with nature. And I have to say that I never really thought a lot about this, my connection to the land and to nature, until I moved to Colorado about 10 years ago now. I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, and then spent a long period of time in the Bay Area in Northern California, and have lived lots of other places. But when I moved here to Colorado, surrounded, as you probably all feel the same way, we're surrounded by all of this majestic and natural beauty. Much to the kind of persistence of my mother, and you'll see my mother features prominently in this talk and also in the exhibition. My mom, who fancies herself sort of an amateur naturalist, she's retired now, so she has a lot of time and energy to put towards her hobbies. When I moved here, she was adamant that I start paying attention to and learning about and identifying all of the plants and flowers that I was encountering in all of my hikes, all of the kind of strolls I took through nature. So I started to pay attention. So in the last 10 years, really only in the last 10 years, the land and natural forms that we find when we're out walking around have become an incredible source of vital energy for me. The diversity of color, the diversity of shape. As artists, I'm sure you're all paying attention to those types of things, but I think when we are out in nature, we are so lucky here in Colorado to be able to experience that so every day in our everyday lives. So I started to pay very close attention to that work. And so this work that you see on the left is something I made pretty close to when I moved here. I moved here in 2012, so this would be within that first year that I moved here. I've always been really interested in sort of symbolic floriography, which is the language of flowers. It's how humans communicate in coded languages using flower blooms as those symbols for different emotions and feelings and ideas. And so I'm particularly drawn to the state flowers of all the states that I've lived in. So those symbols and those icons show up frequently in my work and, again, connect me to these vital sources of energy that I've encountered in all the different places that I've lived. So here you see a carnation, the red carnation for Ohio, we have a columbine for Colorado, and golden poppy for California, all these different blooms. So the land, nature, here's just a iStock photo. I couldn't find a good photo of my own of flowers, which was such a shame, but here's a little image. Began to form this sort of really important visual language for me that I've used over and over again. They become these sort of amorphous, abstract shapes, but they're also very familiar. Even if you can't identify each individual bloom, you recognize the floral shapes, you recognize in the differences in color how they might identify as different aspects of someone's personality or identity or a location. And the language of flowers is not a new thing. There's a long history and legacy of lots of artists utilizing sort of the symbology of flowers to say very specific things about people and to kind of create portraits, self-portraits, and also portraits of others. So I think a lot about this Kehinde Wiley portrait of President Obama. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. I was so taken with this portrait when it was first revealed. And of course, as he does often, this portrait is completely filled with really incredible coded floriography meanings, right, that speak to who the president is, who the president was, who the president wants to be. And, you know, I don't think it's completely legible to every viewer, but it's important and it enriches the portrait in a way that encourages, you know, sort of discovery over time, as well as just providing just a spectacular backdrop for this iconic portrait. So, the land, again, the natural world, a very important, vital source of energy for me. Again, and I look at a lot of different cultural, historic uses of flower symbology to say, that says a lot about a particular contemporary community and culture, but also speaks to individuals as well. So here are a sort of slew of different important iconic flower symbols from different Chinese pottery and pots that speak about legacy and royalty and fertility, all sorts of different things. So another source of vital energy for me is popular culture. I love pop culture. I love moments of high spectacle in our history, in our current times. I look at a lot of photography. Most of my work is photography based, and I'm particularly interested in usages of floriography from popular culture. So it combines my love of nature with sort of the spectacle of celebrity, of music, of film. All these different things kind of combine in some of my older work. So these are images from a series of works that I did about the memorial service for Princess Diana, where I did some research and found out that, of course, if you start to look for it, you'll see it everywhere. This like really significant usage of flower language in all sorts of events in all of our lives. So during her memorial service, there were these 3 pretty epically large floral bouquets displayed on her casket when she was sort of paraded through London. And again, these flower blooms were chosen by very specific individuals, and the specific flowers that were chosen for each bouquet were very symbolic and significant. And so I was so taken with these images and how the flowers were featured so prominently, and yet they probably weren't noticed by everyone, but they spoke loudly about her position in the royal family, or her lack of position in the royal family, how beloved she was by all of the UK population, and they stand out in every image that you see of this memorial service. So I was looking again at these really high moments of spectacle and thinking about how flowers featured prominently. And again, this vital energy, right? I keep going back to vital energy. This vital energy about my connections, my personal connections to these kind of moments of spectacle. I have a very specific memory of the passing of Princess Diana. I was in high school at the time, and I had come back home from a weekend away at a friend's cabin, a bit of a debaucherous weekend, came home a little bit addled, and I walk in the door, and the first thing that my dad says is, "The princess has died." And no context, the princess is dead. And I remember thinking, I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, I needed to take a shower, go and take a shower, come out and turn on the TV, and of course, it's everywhere. And in fact, the princess had died. And so I have this, like all of these moments of popular culture spectacle always circle back to a personal anecdote or connection that I have to these particular images. And again, a crucial moment of vital energy for me, because it connects these moments of spectacle, these moments in our popular culture, in history, fuse with my own personal history, with my own personal narratives, and then become completely integral to the way that I think about my own life and the stories that I tell about my life and myself. So here's another one from that series. This is actually not from her memoir, so this is an iconic image, at least for me, of Princess Diana's wedding portrait. So this is her bridal portrait. And I might be showing my age here, but this is an iconic image for me, at least. I just remember her, this is her in that ginormous dress, sitting on these like beautiful red velvet stairs. And I just remember thinking, when I started looking at this image, and again, I work from photographs a lot, ones that I find online, but ones that I've also taken. But this one, iconic. When I started kind of manipulating it in Photoshop to see what I wanted to do with it, I completely blew out her image so that it's almost illegible, but then she becomes this sort of like amorphous Jabba the Hutt like shape. But for those of you, and for me, this image is so iconic, it's so burned into my memory that I even as blown out and as amorphous as this image is, I can pull that image to my mind immediately. So again, this idea that pop culture is sort of this trivial, superficial thing, I don't think it really truly is if and when it becomes like deeply connected to your own personal narratives. So again, this is more examples of work that where I'm focusing on these really high moments of spectacle, but where flowers are being utilized. So I'm thinking about athletes, right, and how these ice skaters. This is just, Oksana Bayul, Nancy Kerrigan, and Chen Liu. This trio of medal winners forever stands out in my mind, right? And then this idea that you're gifted this bouquet at the end of your performance. Again, with very specific blooms being utilized, is just really stands out very clearly in my personal history and my personal memories. So, I'm also very drawn to moments of magic and divination, even before I started to think about geomancy and how it connects to my own Chinese history and culture. I've been interested in all sorts of different divination practices. This idea that we can give over control to something else to tell us what to do. I love that because I'm a very type A person. I like to be in control, and these last few years have felt very out of control to me. And I think also when I became a parent, I realized that I have absolutely no control over anything anymore. And so I started to think about, what would it be like to turn everything over to something else, right? To be told what to do. So a little while ago, I started to get interested in this cartomancy system, the Lenormand cartomancy system. It's kind of related to tarot in that it's a card-based divination practice, but it's quite different also. And I was first drawn to this set of images. Of course, the theme over and over again is flowers. So I was first drawn to this system because it was so richly infused with all of this really symbolic imagery. And of course, you can see at the bottom center of every card is this really beautiful, beautifully illustrated and very significant set of blooms. So I started to appropriate some of these, some of the images and some of the flower blooms and some of the kind of celestial patterns from this Lenormand series and Lenormand cards, and started creating my own sets of Lenormand cards at a much larger scale. I was thinking at the time about landscape again, foreign landscapes maybe that we could never reach, or I would never be able to reach, like outer space, like the sky, like nebulae, multiple nebula. I don't know the correct term. And just this idea that I could rely on chance, that I could rely on maybe a sort of fantastical game-like system of divination to kind of help hone and focus the choices and decisions that I was making, not only in my artwork, but also in my personal life, in my teaching life. Again, this has been quite a turbulent time for all of us, and so I still think, I'm still thinking a lot about, and will continue to think a lot about how fortune-telling, right, this sort of mystical, mysterious, superstitious system of belief maybe how it could sort of help me regain a level of control. So this is another piece that's based on those Lenormand cards. This was maybe one of the only interactive pieces I've ever done. It was for an exhibition where we were encouraged to think about play in our work. And I was like, I don't really think about play in my work, but I worked with this set of cards, and it was this system of 6 cards where you could the viewer could choose which card they wanted and put them in place. And you can see, I've used these images quite a lot, but again, pulling from popular culture, weaving that into personal narratives, images that stand out for me. I mean, again, you can see Nancy Kerrigan is there, you see Britney Spears and the MTV Music Awards. Again, I might be showing my age here, but again, a very iconic moment for me. All sorts of wonderful little things. But then also, again, my family always shows up. This is my dad, and he is part of, is he part of this one? I think he was part of this system of cards that I created for this piece. But here he is paired with, slot machines from Vegas. Family, it always comes back to family and how these, popular culture moments, these moments of divination kind of all come back to my family. So in the fall, when I was on sabbatical, I've been doing a lot of thinking about geomancy, as I've said, and I've been doing some research into Chinese geomancy and thinking about how it relates to burial practices. And this is a very close and personal subject for me that I've been thinking about recently because my parents are getting older, and I'm thinking a lot about end-of-life conversations and what happens when legacy starts, right? Legacy after someone passes on, or how we can encourage or think about legacy like in the present, like when somebody's still alive. So I started to think a lot about traditional Chinese burial practices. And then I was thinking a lot about the fact that my parents are immigrants. They came over from Hong Kong and Taiwan in the late 60s. And thinking about how those traditional practices are translated when you move to a different place. So much about traditional Chinese burial practices has to do with a connection to motherland, being buried or being laid to rest in Mother Earth. So that means for my parents, that would be mainland China. So I was thinking a lot about, well, what happens when you leave your home, start a new home somewhere else? How are those practices translated, or are they able to be translated? Do you lose something when you have to when you have to modify those practices for a new place that you're living, a new culture that you're a part of? You're sort of in this in-between space. So I started to think a lot about that in relationship to my parents, and I didn't want it to be something morbid, right? Like I think in the West, we think, this end-of-life conversations and death can be such a taboo subject matter. It's so, it's approached with such fear sometimes. And I didn't want to think about it that way because my parents don't think about it that way. They are so pragmatic about the end of their lives. I wouldn't say they're excited, but they are so, I don't think anyone's excited about it, but they're so profoundly resolute in that it will happen. It will happen to all of us, and they're okay with that because they have these wonderful children that have these wonderful lives, and they feel satisfied. And I'm like, oh, if I could only feel that way at the end of my life. So this idea that there is a magical practice associated with end of life from my own culture, it just was so exciting to me. And my research really kind of pivoted away from these traditional burial practices into this more sort of magical realm. And I think, again, for me, after processing this for a little while, it was more palatable to me to think about magic, to think about this flow of vital energy that then feeds the legacy of not just your loved one who has passed, but all the generations that come afterwards. To me, that felt much more easy to think about, less sad, right? Less bleak. So these are some of the forms that I was looking at when I was creating some of the work that's in the gallery. These auspicious sites for burial that are personified into animal shapes, into human shapes, all about how the land and water can direct the location of where someone might be buried. So again, this idea that our vital energy can come from down below and kind of spring up in these locations was really interesting to me. And that's where some of this work, this is all brand new work. And I'm still, this is my first opportunity to kind of talk about this work and to think about this work because I've just been in production mode. And so it's exciting to me to be able to gather my thoughts. And I really hope that during our Q&A, we can have a conversation about it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about it because, again, I'm still processing a lot of this. So how do we channel our vital energy? And I've already started to touch on this. And for me, I'll go back, it's family, right? Like, how do we channel the energy that we locate? We channel it into the people that surround us. We channel it into the ones that come after us. So for me, it's about my parents, and then it's also about my children. So where does it come from, and how do I put it into someone else? So these are images of my parents and me and my sibling. I'm the tubby one being held by my mom in our bathroom, or my childhood home, and then that's me with my dad. And those are my parents, and this is up in the top right is my dad came over from Taiwan in the late 60s and ended up in Mississippi in the late 60s. So that must have been an interesting time for him, but he doesn't talk very much about it. I just think it's fascinating to me that he was there in the late 60s, a very crucial time in civil rights movement as a Chinese immigrant graduate student. So how do we channel our vital energy? I think a lot about the stories that we tell to ourselves and about ourselves, about our history and our legacies. I think as artists, we have a very unique opportunity to explore, to fabricate our histories, to sort of be who we want to be, to make things up, to change who we are whenever we want. And so when I think about my family history and my family lineage, I don't have much to go on. My parents don't share a lot of stories with me and my siblings. And so a lot of the work that I do is this sort of fabrication and construction of this sort of false personal narrative that I dream I have. So for a long time, I was thinking through different modes of how to talk about family history and legacy. So I was borrowing and appropriating lots of different systems of that. So I was looking a lot at heraldry from Western Europe. I was thinking about patterns and iconography related to this is sort of a faux Louis Vuitton, sort of claiming this luxury status for myself. I was creating these sort of family crests for my family, my parents, and also my in-laws, who are like second parents to me. I have known my in-laws since I was 15 years old, so they've been my parents for a very, very long time. So I'm creating these like false narratives, right? Like, because my parents really don't tell me anything. And then I made, my own sort of heraldic shield for myself. So this is like this giant heraldic shield that I made representing me. And I'm using all sorts of different symbols. And you probably have seen the exclamation point has shown up a lot in this talk. It's a significant personal symbol that I've sort of taken as my own. I feel like it sort of is the same shape as a person, and I think it also represents sort of my emphatic nature, so I love the exclamation point. And so we channel our vital energy into our loved ones, into our family, into this story of ourselves. And so that incorporates all sorts of people, and people come into your lives, new people. And so this is a piece that I made about my husband, my partner, this take on when you tie the old tradition of tying tin cans to the back of your car after you get married. So here's the back of our now very old Subaru that I drove down here from Boulder today. I was a little concerned about it wasn't going to make it, but there it is in its new form. And then all of these sort of items, instead of tin cans, all these items that are shared by the two of us, kind of rattling along behind us. Yes, and then I became a parent, and I had a kid, and then everything went out the window, and I completely lost all sense of self. Continue to. It's been 6 years now since I've been a parent. I'm still trying to figure out how to balance all the multiple identities that I now carry. So this is a series of works that I made after I had my first kid. All these kind of amorphous symbols, but those of you that are parents out there may recognize some of these shapes. These are all based on infant toys, silhouettes of infant toys. But I love how, if you don't recognize it, there's still something kind of exciting and dynamic about these shapes, just in the color palette and the sort of borders that they create. So, channeling our vital energy into progeny, right? Into new identities, into this like clash of feelings that seemingly don't go together but exist simultaneously for you. And then, oh my gosh, I've got to move a little bit quicker if we're going to have time to talk. I started to think a lot about, right around 2016, I started to think very much about my mom in particular. I was thinking about the women in my life, my mother being one of the most important women in my life, and what it was like for her when she came over from Hong Kong to California, in the late 60s. And this body of work, which is all in the exhibition next door, came from that. And these all are these little tiny 2x3 images, photographs that I've blown up into these large-scale screen prints where I have removed, they're all photographs of her alone or her and friends, and I've removed all the figures and kind of sliced them out of the center. And what I saw was that the sort of silhouette or shadow of the figures remained even after the figures were removed. And I loved how this, for me, represented so much about invisibility of women, invisibility of immigrants, invisibility of the sciences, right? So my mom was a scientist, a woman, and an immigrant. And so for her representation in this body of work, for me, represented so many of the sort of perilous situation that those communities that she occupies have experienced for a long time, but still currently. So this body of work is a portrait of my mom, basically. I'm going to try to move a little quicker if I can get through this. So this final section, this is the last section. What happens when our vital energy dissipates? What happens when things are erased, things become invisible? What happens when, when somebody passes on? What do we do with that? How do we celebrate? How do we mourn? How do we continue the legacy of someone that we lose? And I don't have the answer for this. I'm exploring this right now in the current body of work, but also looking back at older work where I've touched on this over and over again. When I started to make this new work, I didn't make the connection to the Diana series until very recently, that I've been thinking about memorialization and legacy, and what types of stories we tell about people after they're gone, and how those change and are similar but are also different to the stories that are told when the person is alive. I've been thinking a lot about that recently. And I look back quite a bit. I look back with sentimentality, with nostalgia, with anxiety into the past. But I'm trying to, when I think about my relationship with my parents and this inevitable journey they're going to go on, I'm trying to adopt their pragmatism and their sort of their peacefulness, their contentment in their lives as I think about what might happen. I think I'm trying to embrace the unknown and the inevitable. I'm trying to allow myself to lose control, and I'm trying to focus on here are my parents now. This was the first time I saw them after about a year and a half after not seeing them for a long time during the pandemic. This was the first time. And this was on the same trip I was doing field site visits to cemeteries, Chinese immigrant cemeteries. So these are some images that I took during that research. And this is where, this thought process, this kind of confusion, exploration, discovery, all of that is what has fueled this most recent body of work, which I'm showing here in the gallery next door. I'm going to try to wrap up by just kind of going through some of these images. I think maybe I'll stop here, since I want to give time for questions. I end with this image that Allison, who's here photographing, that took right there, and also this message that I've been trying to absorb in myself, that when our vital energy dissipates, it doesn't have to be the end of anything. It can be a moment of rest. The nap ministry is a movement that I'm trying to think more about and trying to absorb into my own practice more. This idea that rest is a radical idea and concept, and that as we think about end of life, as we think about mourning or memorialization or grief or death, that maybe if we recontextualize that idea into an idea of rest, we might be able to make more peace out of that. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chinn. That was so insightful, and I really appreciate how you knit together your practice, and I'm excited for you all, if you haven't seen the exhibition next door, to spend some time in the space. But I would love to have some questions from the audience. We have some time. And so if you've got a question, you can raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you.
It seems like you're someone who went from not caring so much about the land to very much caring, and maybe you went from not caring so much about your family's deep past to very much caring about it and making your practice. And I guess my question is how do you go from like being a person who doesn't really pay attention to something that might be important to them, to actually putting in the time and paying the attention.
Yeah.
Because I could really use some advice.
Okay. Yes, that's a great question. Thank you so much. I think maybe paying attention is a better way to put it. Like I wasn't paying so close attention, right? I wasn't focusing on I was doing everything around it and not talking about it exactly, I think is maybe. So, and I've done a lot of thinking about this. Like why I've asked myself, why am I so drawn to things with imbued history? Why am I such a collector of knickknacks and why do I love flea markets? Why do I love old things, right? And my in-laws come from this like long, Daughters of the Revolution style like history in America. So their lives and now my life is filled with all these heirlooms and things, right? But on my side of the family, no heirlooms, no stories, no history that was really being shared with me. So when I think back to this time where I wasn't really paying attention, or like maybe I didn't really seem like I didn't care, I think still in my studio practice, but also just my regular life, I was drawn to things that were imbued with a sense of history already, that already had like a sense of legacy, a sense of ancestry, a sense of history already in them. That's why I think I love things, old things, right? It's not that belong to somebody else that then belong to somebody else. I love that type of thing. So I think for a long time I was not focused so directly on my personal story, mostly because it wasn't shared with me. And even if I asked direct questions, it was not shared with me. Like my parents are still very reluctant. It's not even actually reluctance. They just say, oh, that doesn't matter. That was in the past, or I don't remember, but I think that's an excuse for just being like, let's not focus on that. Let's very much move forward. And I think on some level, I used to think, was there some trauma, right? Like, was there some trauma they don't want to live? My dad was in Mississippi in the late 60s. Like, was there some trauma there? But I've come to realize that that was not the reason. It was more of a pragmatic, magical ability to just focus only on the present and the future. And I think very specifically that, they had to be able to they had to be prepared to do that if you're going to leave your home country with literally nothing. I mean, theirs is like the cliche classic immigrant story where they had like a suitcase and $30 in their pocket. They came over and then they never looked back. And they didn't really go back to visit family. They didn't have strong connections with the remaining family in Asia. They focused on the current family and the future family. And so some of that, not paying attention or not focusing on it or not thinking it was important was because I didn't have anything to go on. I had to make it up for myself, and that's when it started to become important to me. When I realized the made up stories were just fiction, right? Like they didn't actually speak to anything. It was just borrowing from somebody else's story. And it wasn't until I started to make that body of work about my mom. It was really, I think for me, it was 2016. 2016, I think a lot of things changed for a lot of people. 2016 made me really think about, how dangerous everybody's situation can be and how important it is to understand where you came from. And that's when I started to ask more questions. They still wouldn't answer them, but through making that series about my mom, I learned more about their history than I ever had before. Number one being the photographs that I was working from, they had dates on them. I don't know if you saw that in some of those images, but they had dates. And whereas before I would say to my parents, what year was it that you came over? What year did you get married? They'd be like, oh, I don't remember, And I'd be like, how do you not remember? But then I was like, I was like, May 1966. That's the earliest date, or whatever it was. I can't remember what it was, but like 1966 was the earliest year. And so I was like, oh my gosh, that's when Ma came over. I called my brother and sister, 1966 is when she came over. We finally have like a timeline. And so I started to ask her about that, and she started to tell me things, really incredible stories, little by little. And that's really when I started to pay attention. So really closely pay attention. So I don't know if that answers your question. I don't know if that helps you do what you need to do. I hope we can talk more about that, because we can talk more. Thank you. Thank you. Hi.
I was wondering if you could talk about your aesthetic choices, like how you arrive at the sort of three-color separation.
Oh, absolutely.
Screens or these sculptural cutouts, or this image here.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Let me go back to some of those. Yes, that's like yes, I did not focus on that in this talk. That's a whole other talk that I give. I am a printmaker, and I do mostly screen printing. And I use the bitmap dot very significantly in my work, and it comes from those of you that are screen printers or know about printmaking. You know that in screen printing is a stencil-based technique where, in order to achieve any type of semblance of a photographic image or tonal gradation, the image has to be turned into a pattern of dots, right, in order to be printed in that technique. And so since I'm so drawn to photography, I was using the bitmap all the time. And what I realized is that with the bitmap dot, you can really play with the legibility and illegibility of an image depending on how large the dot is or how small the dot is, what color you print it in. And I was really interested in that. Oh, gesundheit, Debbie. I was really interested in that because I am somebody who is very interested in what I like to think of as a non-passive viewing experience. I really love the idea that I make two-dimensional work that is oftentimes put on the wall and viewed on the wall, but that there isn't that sort of classic one perfect ideal position to look at the image, right? We're so used to seeing something on the wall and we stand right in front of it, and that's like think about if any of you have gone to see the Mona Lisa, right? And that sort of like cattle shuffle that you do through the stanchions to get to stand right in front of it and get your picture, or I don't even know if you're allowed to put it, but to stand in front of that tiny little thing. It's wonderful, but I'm not really interested in that. I'm really interested in the multitude of perspectives and viewpoints and angles that you can get when you're looking at work like this. It will look so different to you when you're up close to it than when you are back from it. When you are up close to an image like this, it's just this pattern of dots, right? It seems completely abstracted. But then if you go to the side, or if you go 10, 20 feet back, or you go 50 feet back, things come into focus, or they don't, right? And I love that viewers are encouraged to move when you're looking at my work. So I'm really interested in that, even in, let me go here, to some of the work that's dimensional, because, let me go back to this. Right? So this looks like a flat image, but if it's viewed from the side, the flower portions of these images here are raised and they come out from the surface. So when looking at it from that ideal vantage point, it might look like a painting or a drawing. But then you move to the side and you see there are some dimensional sculptural elements to that. And I love that kind of reward that the viewers get when they're encouraged to move. So it all starts from my interest in screen printing, the technical aspects of screen printing, my love of photography, and my love of sort of optical illusion in a way. In a different talk that I give, I start my talk out with one of those magic eye posters, again, showing my age again here, but those child of the 80s and 90s, those magic eyes where you have to cross your eyes to have the shape come out. I love that. I love that. And not that I want your eyes to cross when you're looking at my work, but this idea that you have to find your own perfect moment of focus in this work is really interesting to me. And so I have played with really, really big dots like that Jabba the Hutt Diana. And then, when I'm more interested in the legibility of the image, like in the series about my mom, I'm using a more precise dot pattern so that you can really pull that image out more clearly. And then, you asked about CMYK. So I use the Cmyk process in screen printing. It's for those of you that aren't familiar, it's a 4-color process where you're using 4 highly pigmented process colors of ink that are layered on top of each other that result in the semblance of a full spectrum of colors again. So this looks like a colored photograph, but it's been printed only with 4 colors in different patterns put on top of each other. And again, this is a technique that's utilized in commercial printing processes. So this is the way that magazines and newspapers are printed and continue to be printed using these color separations. And I love that connection also to the sort of commercial aspects of screen printing and the accessibility and the ability to, the distribution of that type of work towards the masses. I love the conversation that my work has with that history as well.
Okay, well, I think, Chinn, your invitation to bring everybody over to the gallery is great. It's a really wonderful exhibition. This new body of work is just wonderful to host in our space and to realize with you. And I want to say thank you to our students who were a big part of the team to transform the gallery. It'll be quite different. If you've been there, if you haven't been there in a while, it's quite transformative. And it's a wonderful space to experience the work. It's all conceived of by yours, of course. It's a singular experience in the space. Thank you so much for giving this lecture tonight and for sharing insights. I do feel like we could talk for another hour. I especially could talk about printing too for many hours, but it's been wonderful to hear all of this about your work and your background, and very generous of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And before we end next door, I do want to just pay tribute to a colleague that we lost recently, our dear M.J. Sullivan, a long-time faculty member here at UCCS, a wonderful poet and filmmaker, and just a vital person in our campus and our community. So just to honor her legacy as well tonight, I had the chance to speak to all of you about her, and if you remember as her as well, I'm here with you. Thank you again, everyone, for coming out. And please, maybe one more round of applause for everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I hope we can chat more next door. Thank you.